Great. So welcome everyone on our very last lecture of the school year. Thank you for joining tonight. I know all of us are on the edge of burnout, either because of finals or graduation. So I'll keep it short. My name is Paula. Next to me is Juliet. And I'd like to welcome you all on behalf of the lecture committee. After one whole year, I hope you're familiar with the lecture series by now. In a sense, our goal is to bridge our practices and the current social discourses by bringing in diverse perspectives from different fields regarding design, art, and architecture. Françoise is a public educator, activist, and writer of both French and English. Currently based in Paris, she is the co-founder of the association Decolonize the Arts. She has curated the School of Locality Nomad, Fragments of Repair, which is a multi-part project consisting of an exhibition, collective study program, and a series of gatherings. This work is in connection with the artist Kader Attia's show with the same name and is at the moment displayed in Utrecht until July. Françoise's latest English publications include The Womb of Woman, Race, Capital, Feminism, and Decolonial Feminism. So a small peek into the lecture tonight, Françoise is going to suggest to look at futurity from the position of a child, not to celebrate the child's innocence, but to remind ourselves that we often seem to take the world at the level of full adulthood. It was around the topics of the fragility at birth of the human beings and its need for interconnectedness, for affective touch and smell to survive. We're all very excited to wrap this chaotic year with Françoise, and please give it up to Françoise Vergès.
Well, good evening, and thank you for the invitation. So you asked me to speak about, protecting each other without repression. That was, the invitation. And in fact, my last book in French, which is going to be translated into English next year, is about, I call it family theory of violence for an anti-racist politics of protection. And, how do we protect without, turning to repressive measure? But also, first, we need to understand, what I mean by, to be clear about repression and repressive. I'm not arguing for total absence of repression, like we do whatever we want. We need to repress ourselves also, our own bad feeling or destructive practices, or, acting to repress, some impulses. But when I talk about repression, it's again, the one which is giving to the state all the power to exercise punitive and, punishment and carceral regime. And giving so to the state and its institution, the police and the tribunal, or effectively the power to act, to protect. So in other words, what can we propose as an anti-racist decolonial feminist political protection? And I always work with, different, by starting with many questions and then asking myself, is there a thread between these different questions, or can they be, just one by one? I mean, is there a thread to talk about when we talk about violence, to talk at the same time about the kind of violence that racial capitalism unleash, or imperialism, or the war and the violence against women, or are they totally separated? So putting, different pieces of puzzle, in front of me, and not necessarily looking for completing a full landscape, something that would be neat, but nonetheless, perhaps to look at root, circulation, and connection. So, and as Paula said in the introduction, I have noticed, especially in the school of Fragment of Repair, which is in connection with Kader Franco-Algerian Kader Attia shows in Utrecht, that we were speaking about protection during the different workshops. We have 7 sessions as fully, able adult, that we, this protection as now, like as we are now, and I was struck by that, as if we have fully integrated the idea that we are born as fully autonomous people, that, that we can think with reason from the beginning. And autonomy, then integrating the idea that autonomy is, mean no interdependency and, no real dependency, but being totally free, And so speaking about protection as something outside of ourselves, and then it will be just effectively, then we will say protecting marginal or weaker people, or then criticizing the state politics about protection. So protection is seen either as negative, or as we are independent of in a relation of power, or, or needed, but needed in the sense. So we forget in that we all, once started in a state of total dependency on someone else, when we were babies. Not just that we needed shelter and food, but we needed deep affection, for mere survival. And I just want to give you an anecdote. After the war, psychologists had an experience. They put babies in hospital, being fully, taken care of, good food, very warm, everything was perfect. And there were other babies who remained with their mother in jails, so in jail and being, with their mother in the cell. And after 15 days, the babies in the prison were absolutely in much better state than those in the hospital, because they were with their mother. So I'm not, idealizing motherhood here. I'm talking about the need, for this dependency. And so how do we organize, and how do we think about this dependency and interdependency in a way that is not effectively giving just to power and then to feel, under the power of someone? All society have some form of social organization of interdependency and protection, and rules around intergenerational connection and transmission, but also rules about crime and those who transgress the rule of the community. We can talk about it in the discussion. And these, for instance, protection and the question of protection, we are very challenged, in fact, during the pandemic recently, because suddenly so many young people found themselves without protection, had to return to their family, and their parents became the only protection from something, because otherwise they could not survive. That was interesting, but not very much analyzed in the media. But the question of protection, also the need for protection, is either translated into laws, but these laws, social protection, for instance, laws of social protection, has always been, in fact, voted after struggle. The state has never, decided by itself, to protect about, women or, gays or workers or minorities, or even fighting for more freedom of expression, freedom of association. They were always, to be protected. And so what kind of institution had to be set up to protect the law that protect, so to enforce them, to be sure that they will be enforced. And so in a way, a lot of interdependency were transformed into dependency from the state. But also in the state, there is a certain rule, which is you will be protected, as long as you abide by the laws of your protector. So that you will be protected only if you accept the condition. And we see that for women, right? That is very clear for women. Patriarchy will say, if you get out with a short skirt at 4 a.m., you cannot be protected. So the state imposed some condition upon which you will be protected. But this condition reinforced patriarchy and, and obedience to the order is not, full free protection. So another point I want to raise also in this question about protection is, how do we think about the war, as Silvia Federici in a recent book has called the war against women? There is a war, she said, there is a global war. There have been a global war historically against women. How do we think that? How do we think about the war against women? How do we, who is it? Who is doing that war? Men? So what do we mean by men? And what do we mean by woman also? Do we include effectively trans feminism in a way, trans women? not just be in terms of trans, but also the sex workers, the women working as domestic, the workers, the women at home. So what is the war against women, and who is, leading that war? And what are the tools? I mean, what are the weapons of that war, and how we finish? And who protect them? And I just say that because recently, again, there was a woman killed in France, a feminicide, and there was a lot of associations saying the state is not doing anything to protect us. The state is not acting enough. And, again, I mean, this demand for more protection by the state, that the state is not doing enough. And at the end of the day, because in France right now, every 2 days, a woman is being killed by someone close to her, either the companion or the ex-husband or the husband, right? And so what is to be, what is protection? And then by the focus on feminicide, which is of course extremely important, we are not looking at the other way in which the state itself fabricate vulnerability and fragility of women. I mean, 80% of part-time jobs are held by women in France. So, being underpaid, underqualified. So, this fabrication also of unprotected, who will be protected. Of course, this was the question, is there an increase in violence? Because, I mean, someone could tell me that there's always violence. The history is a history of catastrophe, there is nothing new about it. Well, I will say that effectively, on the one hand, according to the to data, you have less death globally in the world that, 2 centuries ago, less death by famine, or even pandemic. But I will argue that there is much more slow death, a systemic condemnation to slow death in the world, to premature death. There is like no place in the world when you can escape that, regime. I mean, even we saw, how the right to breathe is not universal here. The right, a lot of right connected with life, with be able to live, are not universal. So there is a violence of increase, and it's related also to a permanent state of war for many years now. It's permanent. There is a war against drugs, the war against the virus, even the virus, there is a war, the war against, terrorism, the war against this, the war. There is constant, we are living in a permanent state of war against people, of course, and against the planet. There is still colonization, occupation, form of apartheid around the world, still there. So how do we think this permanent state of war? And for me, the question of protection connected with peacefulness, the possibility of having some rest, to be fully restful. And I was reading some testimonies by migrant or refugee, and especially one by a woman struck me, as she was saying that when she arrived in a house and she understood that this, there would be real rest there. I mean, that she was safe, not rest, that she was safe, fully safe. It was not a temporary. She slept very well. So the question of sleeping, or being allowed to sleep, not sleeping with just like with one eye closed, as we say in French or whatever, that to be able to put your head on the pillow and really give your body some rest. This right to rest is also connected with a feeling of total safety and security and of protection. And it's very important to have this right to rest, to understand this right to rest. But in the permanent state of war that we are living, of course, there is no real possibility of rest. Rest is a privilege, feeling, to get some rest is being a privilege, a bourgeois privilege. So when we look at this permanent state of war and we think about it and we think how it was created and where it's coming from, I will argue that, in fact, as soon as Europe started to colonize the world and started to base wealth accumulation and capital on extractivism not only of the resources of the mine of gold and silver, and then of cotton and sugar and coffee, but also the extraction of the life force of the million of indigenous people and then of the African enslaved, until premature death. As you may know, on the plantation, the life expectancy was of 8 to 10 years at the beginning for many years, so it was shortened. And this was also why the slave trade lasted for so long, for centuries, because for many, slave owners, there was no reason to really reproduce. We have this idea of reproduction. There was very little, except in the United States, because there was, interdiction of the slave trade with Africa in 1808, but the reproduction was done in the United States itself, and the slave trade occur between states, and the reproduction was done, and there was even this expression of the slave breeding industry of women, enslaved women being raped just 2 or 3 weeks after giving birth to have other babies. And even in the archive, you find women who are 17-year-old who have already had 10 births already, or more than that. So the question of extraction of even, from the womb of women, of Black women, as of a life force, of the womb of women as capital. And of course, for me, this extractivism of resources, of life force, of even the making social reproduction a form of an industry of extraction, goes also with exhaustion, exhausting soil, exhausting the subsoil, and exhausting bodies, until, effectively, when you look, for instance, even at the history of the mine, of the gold mine, one is, emptied, capital will move to another one. Extract everything, let people die, move to another one, and leaving behind ruin and wasted lands and wasted, lives, ruins. So this kind of economy, which started in, 16th century, has lasted until this day. And we look, and when we look. And so there is a foundation of capital. And I will say that extractivism, so the economy of extractivism goes, as I say, with the economy of exhaustion, and also the economy of suffocation, that we could make even a link with today, the pandemic, and the question of the lungs, the lungs being attacked, we cannot breathe, right? But the connection with this disease attacking lungs, this is not capital. Although, we are reason that this pandemic, of course, is caused by the virus that, has nothing to do with anything. The virus is a virus. And try to find a host, that's, I don't know if it's his or her, it's objective in its life, whatever that means. But the point that we know that the way in which this has mostly minorities of color and poor community have been affected. The death rate has been higher during the pandemic, show that effectively this is connected not just with the virus, but also with the public policy of protection. Who has access to health, to public health? Who has access to clean water? Who has access to clean air? So it's not just the virus that kill, people. It killed people because they were already, weakened by the politics of racial capitalism. So the question of suffocation that we could, see with the pandemic, which were racialized, effectively we can connect it with the I can breathe, that connect with the police violence and the question of effectively suffocation. But do remember that during slavery, during colonial slavery, enslaved were sometimes punished by putting a mask on their face, right? So they could not eat and could not speak. And they was connected with not speaking. And when you do not speak, you're breathing. When you cannot speak, breathe with your mouth fully, you breathe less, it's not as good. So there is a question of what I mean by suffocation. And today, for instance, the clean air is very difficult. According to the World Health Organization, there are more deaths because of air, polluted air per year than any other cause, So the question of air, the right to breathe and to breathe clean air, and so breathing is absolutely, without breathing, there is no human life, right? So all this is connected. So I make a link, and we can, perhaps discuss it further, explain it further. You can ask me questions between extractivism, exhaustion, and suffocation. And there's this, so capitalism, of course, for me, there is no capitalism without race, without racial formation. And then there is no race without private property. And that private property, we can then go around with what I, talk about at the beginning, the connection between private property and patriarchy, the establishment of patriarchy and private property. Who is the head of the family is, most of the laws decided that it will be men. I mean, we will talk about community where it was not like that, but okay, let me go back to that. So the private property leading, guarantees some protection of your private property, and therefore the family. I mean, we could look at the master house as the model for that. The master house, the master, own the house, on everyone in the house, the wife and the children, and on everyone in the plantation, and rules over, that vast space, and will decide who can come in the house, out, who is, and who can circulate. So private property has help in Western law, but also which has been extended to many countries through colonization, decide who can be protected and what can be protected. So without private property, and for instance, non-white people, Black and brown people were of course, denied property through colonization, and that was important. And the connection, they were less protected, they had less right because they had no private property. So this is, the connection between, so how to have an anti-racist policy of protection will mean that to challenge the laws of private property. And so wishes also lead me to the universal model of the master house, the connection with patriarchy, whiteness, private property, the right to circulation, the connection also between the master house and the larger global world, because we know they were connected with bank, insurance, and the market, the global market. So this led, as I say, this model led, to decide who and what can be protected and needed to be protected. And to feel protected will mean that a roof, the right to rest, as I say, water, effectively, and also safety. And this is very important as we understand what is protection and what we need protected. And I'm thinking right now of this huge crisis of humanity rather than a crisis of migrant today. And that these are people who are not protected at all, and Europe facilitate them to be unprotected, that they can die in the Mediterranean without any sepulture, and their death is absolutely legitimated. But more than that, for instance, the question of protection and this, what constitutes protection? How do we feel protected or unprotected? What mean protection? We can also observe it today in the incredible rate of suicide by children less than 10 in the camp in Greece or northern Syria or elsewhere. When children less than 10 choose to die rather than to live, because they do not feel protected at all, and a child less than 10 understand, and this connects to the anecdote we're telling you, where children, even when they were, in nice situation, will in fact not survive rather than. So this question of interdependency and protection is very important. So how do we, how do we think about protection? Right now, a lot of demand for protection, whether it's about migrant or woman or minority, are triggered by image of violence. We see image of violence, and we see people being unprotected, and we demand for protection. But image do not speak for themselves, right? I mean, they show us something, but they do not speak for themselves. We can think about the image. I mean, the first image of police violence in the United States were about Rodney King in Los Angeles in 1993, I think. And this was filmed, and then it was in fact the police was able, to show like slide by slide and deconstruct even the violence. And of course there is George Floyd. But what do we see? What do we see? And what is effectively what what will show us what is violence and the question of protection that we want to imagine? Because what do we see? Lynching was shown. I mean, there was postcards circulating all through the United States and being sold, sent to mommy and to auntie, right? Or the image of colonial violence, the incredible repeated image of naked women that were sent from Africa to, mommy and auntie in Europe, or, the image of dead indigenous people. All this question has not stopped the question of colonization. So there is a high visibility of image that in fact produce a form of invisibility. So we have to work about what is visibility, what will make things visible, violence visible, not just as in fact a certain of porn violence, as some people say, but showing, we can show the system can adjust, the system can propose certain things to stop the incredible violence, or to ask, or to in fact justify demand for more protection by the state, right? That the state will, produce more protection. And so this will not, it does not address the deep question of this question, of the violence being enacted. There is a constant struggle to protect life, not against death, but to protect life. That has been the constant struggle of minority and community, indigenous community, community of color. Because they have understood that there is no universal right to breathe, as I say, no universal right to circulate. And for that, for instance, the question of circulation and what are the circulations that are protected by passport, by the possibility of money, and the right to circulation that are not protected. As you may know, for instance, young people in the West are absolutely encouraged to travel. That will constitute part of the selfhood, self-discovery. Go travel, look at the world, go through the world, and that will be very good for you, right? And even some people are encouraged, for a year between high school and university to go somewhere and travel. But if you are a young woman or young man from Afghanistan or Pakistan or Mali or Chad, you will not have that right. What you will write about your travel will not be seen as, the travel literature, will not enter the genre of travel literature, whereas this has been very important for even in the formation of the Western self, right? So we do see that the question of circulation and discovery of selfhood through circulation, that has been very part of the experience of selfhood for Western children, is not effectively universal. There is no universal right to live a quiet, full life, right? And as I say, there is, as Ruth Wilson Gilmore said about capitalism, that it's a fabrication or differentiated vulnerability to premature death. That some children, some human beings, when they are born, are already condemned to premature death. They will not live until 80 years old. They will not, die surrounded by their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. There is always, they are marked with premature, because they will not have access to full education, to health, to clean air and clean water. There is no universal right to childhood, and Nadira Shelhoub-Kervakian, a Palestinian scholar, talk about this unchilding. She called this unchilding, that there is a politic, and she talked about Israel when children are being criminalized and treated as adults. And there is, as you know, many children being, jailed in Israel. But this criminalization of children, we can see it also, of course, in different other parts of the world. In France, for instance, the young people, if they are Arab or Black, are criminalized. And young women, if they are Roma, are absolutely, there can be 12-year-old, they will be tried as adult. So there is no universal right to childhood, to the development as a child, that you need toys, that you need safety and security, and that you need all this. Some children will not have that. So how can we understand this, the fact that in 2021 we still have this kind of things, whereas there was so much hope in the 1960s with the, especially the incredible movement of what has been called decolonization in the 1950, 1960. But decolonization, the 1960 decolonization, did not produce reparation and protection. It was, in a form of extractivism replaced by another, it moved one form of extractivism to another, and there was an attack on the question of protection, right? It was, the fact that effectively that there was no possibility, decolonization was not transformed into protecting resources from the global south or people in the global south, or even, cultural artifact, looting continues and extraction continue. And the body, the non-white body, as life force, as energy, continue to be extracted, until exhaustion. But this has become, in fact, a global situation. It's no longer just in the global south that we find this. There is an extension about that politic. And I was just this afternoon going to a show, in Paris, and there was a clip about workers in Kosovo. So we are, ex-Yugoslavia, and they are in the building industry. And it was a piece by Doruntina Kasrati, in 2020. And when workers talk about, their work, there is absolutely no protection. They are in buildings, so some of them die, fall into a coma, stay 3 months in a coma, and they go out and they have to work again. It's, they are talking, there is absolutely no protection whatsoever. And they have to have, work with bare hands. So this is not just a situation no longer in the global south. This is also, Yugoslavia is not very far from Germany, the art, or France from the art Europe. And one of the workers says something that struck me, and I want to read it to you. And so, quote, "I think it's better to die than to get injured on the job. When you die, at least you have completed something. When you get injured, you have to live with two burdens, being disabled and not being able to provide for your family. So when you die, at least you have completed something." That sentence, said to me, so death is rather, it's better because you have completed something. There is like the end, and being injured, so not being protected. So death would be, better because you're not protected. And since you're not protected, injuries will make you even more fragile and even more vulnerable to exploitation and marginalization. So patriarchy and racial capitalism cannot provide protection. And it will be, and if there is protection, it will always be conditional, but conditional not in the form of reciprocity. It will be conditional on the term of those in power, but not in, in a relation of reciprocity. State guarantee order, but the state is not neutral, right? There are different forces, but they're also under the domination of race and capital. And again, we saw that with the pandemic. Who get the vaccine, who does not get the vaccine, the anti-Asian racism, the idea even of Brazil or Bolsonaro, that of survival of the fittest will, finally, or let the poor die. So there was no, we saw it very clearly during the pandemic that so many people did not have the right to protection, even to vaccine, so that to be protected from what is coming. So we do see that there is really, there have always been a line, between those who can be protected and those who are not protected. And those who also have to work for the bodies who are protected to be even more protected. So those who come to clean the place where those who are entitled to protection can go to yoga class, meditation, good food, bio-food, whatever, and live in places with garden and have access to clean air and some, green and trees, whatever, where those who provide the clean space have to travel, 2 hours away from the city and live in space where you do not have, parks or things like that. As we know, and there have been studies about that all, in the state, but even in France and in part of Europe also, and in Africa, where you have the toxic waste being dumped is always close to poor neighborhood, is always close to poor neighborhood. Toxicity is being organized. Toxicity is racialized. There is no toxicity is not evenly distributed. But as I say, the dumping in the global south, we have, we have heard a lot about it, so, and let's, pollute this place and that, that they can be polluted. But as I say, this is becoming global. When I say global, for instance, there was a study recently showing that the Western Europe is sending to a country of Eastern Europe all this waste, right? That will be burned in the factory, that will serve as energy in the factory. So this, of course, very toxic fume, and people living there, nearby have asthma, lung disease, cancer. So there is really an organization of toxicity, which is deeply racialized and, of course, class-based. So when I talk, for me, for instance, we need to take the measure, really fully the measure of what is being done, of the violence, so we can imagine the anti-violence strategy. I do think that, in fact, by taking the full measure, we are free of, of the constant information. When we know what we are confronting, in fact, for me, we are more free of imagining something. Whereas, so to note that there is a threatening presence, something that threatens effectively the possibility of imagining, anti-violence and some rest. How to organize, how to organize, for instance, effectively against the fact that there was no universal right to breathe, that it become a universal right. I mean, the right to circulation, how do we going to forge fake papers, and we're going to, create refuge and sanctuary for people, or some new underground railroad through Europe so people can circulate. How we imagine, because we have to take the full measure of the incredible, formidable weapons that, the West or the country in the South, the state that are, abiding by this law, are doing against. I don't know if you saw that, but for instance, recently Europe have invented a truck which have incredible, terrible sound. So migrants, are stopped when they run, because it's so, it makes you practically crazy, like the kind of sound, like, so it's like it's a truck which has, so the imagination of, it's endless. The machine is very, the state is very imaginative, is in absolutely imagining new tools and incredible tools that really create an hostile environment and a toxic environment. So how do we effectively took the full measure of the diversity of weapons to destroy life? When I read that, that the Arctic Ocean will be ice-free by 2036, and states, knowing that, are already, planning the militarization and privatization of the Arctic Ocean. How effectively the constant colonization of any kind of space is being done, how the militarization and privatization that will forbid us to circulate, almost as if we were in some kind of mad science fiction movie, but it's not science fiction movie, it's what is happening. How in 2050, when we read that there will be more plastic than fish in the ocean, right? That, that there is every year the dumping of 400 million of heavy metal, solvent, and toxic sludge and radioactive waste in the ocean. That there is effectively the dumping also of industrial waste that generate 1.4 million deaths every year from disease that could be prevented because of polluted air. So there is an absolute destruction of the environment that is necessary for life, for human life. There is an attack on humanity. And this goes then, we could say, to the theory by someone like Sylvia Wynter or Aimé Césaire or Frantz Fanon and others about that the world needs to be humanized, that the struggle for the humanization of the world is an urgent struggle. Because we are not, as Sylvia Wynter has argued, we are not yet human. We are still living in the age of man, with capital M, that was inaugurated in the 16th century with Western colonization, that decided would deserve protection, who has access to private property and effectively dominion over the land and the world. So this, when I say talking the full measure, I say that quite often. When I say that, people say, well, then there is nothing to do, there is pessimistic. No, for me, again, I want to know what is the psychic price we have to pay. And, we are seeing that the mental problem, that, suffering that is increasing. We have to know, all this, how the creation of this hostile environment to women, to Black and brown body. We know that cities are segregated. We don't need, a regime of segregation. It's segregated. It's normalized segregation. We know that women cannot circulate freely in a city. We know that there is curfew for us women after a while. We know that there is, a lot of places that are forbidden to Black and brown body in the city. They will not circulate freely. Cities are segregated. And I'm talking also about cities in the global south, not just cities. So this regime of segregation, I want us, to take the full measure of it, as I say, to be able to understand how we're going to fight for this, so imagination can be freed. So how do we have the struggle, for peacefulness and protection in this? We have, I was saying, address male violence, why so many women are being killed every day, today. And not just because they are women, but also because they are activists, because they are sex workers, because they are trans, they are killed. There is a killing, a terrible killing of women. And as we know, violence against women increased during the pandemic, during, confinement. Increase everywhere in every country, not just in that country, but everywhere in every country. Why are men terribly afraid of what's happening to them? Why? How do we understand the psychic life of racism? How is being gendered? The gendering of the psychic life of racism and sexism, and how this affects those who are called men differently than those who are called women. In the West, according to data and statistics, men who killed, their former companion or wife, are usually because they were that the woman left them, decided to leave them. So how men imagine themselves able to abandon their family and the woman with whom they live quite easily, in fact, but cannot be abandoned. How do we understand abandonment in this situation of stress, of also male body being attacked, of male body being exhausted, of, as I say, of this male worker in Kosovo saying, I would rather be dead than injured. How do we not enter a certain feminist logic? I'm not saying a feminist, but a certain feminist logic that's saying that we can resolve that by, carceral feminism. Let's lock men, and then we will have more peacefulness and more protection. I do not think that. I don't think that is possible. I think we have to address how violence has become a way of life. And Saga Valencia was a Mexican feminist, and there was has written a book which is called Gore Capitalism. And she talked about how death has become a commodity in Mexico. And she talked about the rape, the constant rape, but also the murder and dismemberment of women, but also women being dumped you know, on refuse and garbage. So the connection between body and refuse, you know, and waste and dismemberment, how this is being. But in my book, you know, and the question of rape, I try also not to stay within, you know, that to ask also about the increasing rate of men being raped during wars in Syria, in Iraq by the US soldiers, in Myanmar, Rohingya refugee testifying of rape by the army, of even during police violence, a lot of testimony about, you know, men being raped by, not necessarily raped by the penis, but being raped by bottle and other things. I mean, let's not get into detail. And why, and of course, the difficulty of talking about that. And even also in Congo, I read a lot of report in Congo, and the difficulty about that. And so how do we also look at rape as, of course, women and much in greater number, but as rape also as a political tool of violence, as, you know, in disciplining tool that we know for also brown and black men. So how do we think about that? So addressing, I mean, understanding and working about, you know, male violence to understand, looking at violence as a way of life, you know, as the fact that wealth is built on, you know, violence, wealth accumulation is built on violence, otherwise there is no. And looking also at all the practices against private property as violence, how privatization is violence, you know, for instance, the Standing Rock, resistance, oh my God, sorry. And I couldn't find my word, but also the strike, you know, women's strike, the women's strike everywhere that are growing. And even, for instance, right now in France, there have been a lot of women who are cleaning women in the cleaning industry, leading incredible strike and winning. So then, and talking about sexual violence in their job, but also, you know, being underpaid, being totally exploited. And also the question of health. So the connection between the chemical they have to use, the musculoskeletal, you know, like pain that they have very quickly. I was talking with 25-year-old cleaning woman, and they say that they are taking up to 10 pills, you know, anti pain pills per day. So the kind of, you know, like how again, the exhaustion of the body, the transformation, the use of, you know, pharmaceutical company doing that. And of course, we could talk about other, you know, epidemic of anti-opioid and everything. Of course, the Black Lives Matter as effectively also a politic of humanizing the world. Road must fall, the question of effectively of decolonizing the public space, also as a challenging and hostile environment of you know, in cities. For me, it's how do we how do we move from experience, you know, my experience, to consciousness. And so again, we don't stay at the image of what we feel, but as, you know, we move to consciousness. And again, you know, for me is how could we revive also some form of utopian thinking, not creating utopian community. I'm not talking that, I'm talking about utopian thinking. When I talk about utopian thinking, because I work a lot on, you know, colonial slavery, it was the fact for me, the incredible strength of the utopian thinking in the way, you know, by the enslaved. I say utopian because it could not be, they knew it will not be tomorrow. But one day we will be free. One day we will be free. And so for 4 centuries, they fought for that. And of course, abolition is not complete today. Abolitionism is still a struggle. But you know, the end of something, the end of certain regime. There was not one day in every part of the world where you have slave, you know, enslavement, when you did not have a form of resistance, you know, whether it was by cooking, whether it's by killing a baby, whether it's by marooning, you know, plotting an insurrection, escaping, building sanctuary, keeping some ritual, you know, so many ways, you know, singing, building art, creating art. And it was constantly this form that, you know, because slavery, colonial slavery, was as natural as day and night, right? It was like that. It's like that. It's natural, right? It's like that, you know. And so it was against that naturalization, against that normalization. And for me, one of the things today, you know, to imagine this protection, this post-racist protection, is to let our imagination be free. So to work on two things: transmission of the struggle that were, you know, and that from which we can learn practices and ways of fighting against violence, and imagination. Today, I do think that that word of imagination is very important and very urgent, especially in a moment when we are told more than ever that there is no alternative. You know, the famous sentence by Margaret Thatcher has become, you know, like a rule. You know, like it's a truth, you know, a common sense. And how we say no, you know, imagination. So how we imagine that the possibility of going in a world that effectively every day brings us so many news of destruction and devastation and of incredible violence, and so many people, and the earth and the plants and the animals and the rivers and the mountain and the seas and ocean not being protected from this incredible avaricious form of, you know, extractivism, how we can imagine that we can repair and we can protect, you know, humanity and also the planet in a post-racist, post-sexist, post-patriarchal, and post-capitalist society. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that was very fruitful and generous sharing. I thought we can open up for questions right away. So for the ones who have questions, please turn on the camera and ask the question yourself, because we're all eager to have as much as human contact as possible in these times. I can start with something that I was thinking along the way, and I think you have mentioned it from a little bit already, but so I think the thing about decolonization and all that, I feel like the word decolonization has been used a lot and almost being spoiled in a way. And I was wondering, because you have you also mentioned that you have a lot of roles as activist, as scholar, as a writer, and I wanted to ask specifically, as a role of an activist, how do you vision the future of decolonization in practice?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there is much faster than it used to be the incredible appropriation of radical sentences. I mean, it went so fast, you know, it goes so fast. I mean, all institutions are decolonial now, right? All, you know, decolonizing is everywhere. So, you know, it's like almost, when I wrote my book about decolonial feminism, I was thinking, oh my God, if I see in 2 months a T-shirt with that being sold on the, you know, famous, you know, online things, you know, by done by women in Bangladesh for 50 cents and being sold for, I'm going to die. But I knew it would be possible. I know it was possible. I know it was possible. Okay, I will say decolonization had to be a practice for now, really. Not so much, you know, like we are decolonizing. What is to decolonize? And to begin with oneself. With oneself, you know, how we have, what have we, you know, nonetheless assimilated as, even as looking at the world, even the cartography of the world in a colonial way, recently, I was talking about, you know, again, seas and ocean, because it's one of my, I mean, I grew up in an island, so, you know, I could not ignore the sea, I could not ignore the ocean. And I was, you know, most of the anti-colonial theory and decolonial theory do not speak about the sea. It's land-based, right? It's land-based. And I was, for instance, the decolonization for me was to rethink the continuum between land and water in a decolonial way. How to rethink, you know, how to not let the sea to the privatization and militarization and reappropriate. So what will be to reappropriate the seas and the ocean, you know, as a feminist decolonial way. So for me, the question of decolonization is to remain constantly wondering how do we understand a fact? How do we see? So it's less, it's not a formula. It has to be practice, in consciousness, right? For now, I mean, for me, I'm close to Angela Davis and Ruth Wilson Gilmore or Robin Kelley idea of abolitionism, that abolition is yet to be accomplished. And you could have decolonization without abolition, but you cannot have abolition without decolonization. So decolonizing is really deeply to understand how the colonial world shapes so many things, has shaped so many things. And the decolonization is not just to say, oh, we have to learn philosophy from the global south. You know, okay, that's extending knowledge. Is not decolonizing. Decolonizing is really to dismantle patriarchy, dismantle sexism. And patriarchy has existed and exists in the global south, you know? So it's not that, we will not be saved by idealizing anything. We have to think liberation without idealization. Idealization was really very important in terms of emancipation, but there was always some kind of redempting agent, you know, the proletariat, the colonized, the whatever, you know, whomever, today, you know, whomever. No, we need to really think outside of that and to think how we're going to invent really other way of organizing the society that are not based on abuse of power and domination. It's not an easy task. Decolonization is not easy. It's really not easy. But as I say, for me today, it will be around what is transmission, what kind of archive, what kind of writing of history and fact, and then imagination. Imagination is the most difficult thing because we are so, to imagine outside of the world we are, you know, which has been built around us is very difficult, but we have to have exercise in free imagination. We have to meet and to let it go and do not say, oh, you're crazy, this will never happen. Yes, it can happen, we do not know. Let's say it. Let's try to say it. Let's really try to exercise. It's an exercise. It's a daily exercise. It's not easy.
Yeah, thank you. Because it's, I feel like the word decolonization is being used so much that it's so hard to grapple even the groups of it. Yeah. But thank you for your response. Anyone who has a question, you're very welcome. Sure, Jeannie, you're muted.
I'll unmute. That was great. I think, you know, coming from the UK, I think that, you know, we have a lot of decolonization that's needed. Certainly with my own university, there are ongoing discussions, and I don't think it's a bit like a feminism. You know, feminism, we're not post-feminist. You know, we are still in that process. So I really enjoyed the lecture, the thoughts, because I think that there is a lot of knitting up about sort of from the history and what is happening now, which I think is necessary. You know, having been around long enough to have experienced some of those sort of struggles for all sorts of against patriarchy. And I think it's really important for young people to actually sort of hear things and value things. And I think that when you're using things like words like decolonization, and certainly in the UK, you know, the furor that we had about the in Bristol when they threw the statue down in the of Colston of the slave, you know, there was huge debates. You know, we maybe are not as advanced as France. I don't know, but I mean, I think that there's just huge work to be done. And yeah, and anyway, I just want to say, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think what is very important, what you say, very, very important, It's because in Europe, most people have thought that decolonization was for the colonized and not for the colonizing society. And this is, what is happening in Europe. I mean, the decolonization of Europe, because you cannot, I mean, this is what Aimé Césaire said in Discourse on Colonialism. You cannot enslave and colonize without this coming back to you, without it contaminating even the most progressive ideologies, So, and this is what also he say, when he resigned from the French Communist Party in 1956, and he said, you don't want to understand, you're okay with me to be a communist, but you don't want me to be a black man. You always think that you're better, that you have been so ingrained yourself with the idea of superiority of the West that you cannot admit me as an equal. And then to listen to what I have to say, that as a black man, I have another view of what is liberation, because I came from another place. And so I do think that we are in a way there, in that moment, and it's very difficult, as you said, because decolonization has arrived in Europe. Is no longer, and quite often, for people, when I talk in France, what happened in Algeria? I said, let the Algeria do what they have to do, but what do you do? What are you doing to decolonize century of colonial thinking and practices? For instance, in the UK, so many people were settlers, right? And then they came back. So or the family made their fortune in enslavement or plantation, whatever. So this is not, you cannot just say this was past. And in France also, I mean, I have talked about it elsewhere, and so many people know about that. But when I was at the head of the committee for the history and memory of slavery, a lot of French were telling me our ancestors were neither slave owner nor slave traders. So it's bad, it's sad, but we have nothing to do with it. I say, okay, sure. Not everyone was a slave owner or a slave trader. But your ancestors consumed coffee, sugar, tobacco. It made their life easier, right? It was better to have sugar and tea than, not having sugar, and sugar give you energy, whatever. And then you got cotton, and of course it was terrible. The conditions in the factory were terrible, but nonetheless it so led to the Industrial Revolution and betterment. And where this come from? Where the tobacco, cotton, and so on came from, from the coffee. So of course you were not directly involved, but you benefited. So there was a decolonization, to understand why Europe is so wealthy still today. It's not just because, Europeans would be more talented or more, more talent, innate talent than other people, but also because of that. So this, I do think, yes, the question of decolonization in Europe, and as you say, Anna, of course, it's no surprise that there is so much resistance because it really now brings to some of the foundation of the society, of the UK society, or the French society, or the German or Italian society. It shows some lies also, it unveils some lies of them, and so it's not that easy for people.
Thank you. We have another question from Anais.
Hi, yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Françoise, for this brilliant talk. I think it's a lot of things to think through. I was wondering, so I'm from Kanaki, New Caledonia. For those who don't know, it's a French settler colony in Oceania, in the Pacific. I was wondering, like, through your readings and also your experience, what you've seen, the people that you work with, like, I'm thinking about our context where a lot of people who are descendant from like colonial migration, post-colonial migration now, especially for our context, like from the Asian Pacific region, see themselves as settlers in relations to indigenous Kanak. So for example, we have a referendum for independence and they vote against independence. Even though indigenous people have like consistently, in French we say tendre la main, so given the vote to non-indigenous people when they didn't have to. And so I'm wondering, how do we think through and emulate anti-colonial solidarity between these communities with indigenous people in our context, like Kanak, when they think of themselves as settlers. And it makes me also think of what you're saying about settlers, like safety and protectionism, because in settler colonies like Kanaki, settler property has such a huge role. Like a few months ago, a young Kanak man was killed because he tried to steal the car of a white settler. And a lot of people online were saying, oh, that we're not questioning that he even deserved to die because he tried to steal this car. And people were saying that the settler was trying to protect himself, but at no point his life was threatened. He was just trying to protect his property, which was his car. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that's very important, because the construction of the settler entitlement is very important in colonialism. It's very, it's part of the divide and rule. So Asian community in Kanaki who are not white completely, but nonetheless the white will see them above the indigenous and give them some privilege, and this privilege they will say they will be protected by this privilege and use this privilege, this form of, we okay with the rulers, right? And so if we are okay with the rulers, we will be protected, and the indigenous, and so there's this idea also that we have in in the current French colony, that because they are French, any French can come, right? They are open to France, whether it's Kanaki, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Guyana, Réunion, Mayotte, or the Pacific Island. And they are not asking themselves, but why who gave you the right? Who gave you the right to arrive and buy land and build and have, like that? And you don't know the history of this island. You don't even speak the language. You don't even bother to do that. But then you are at home. You're chez vous, you are at home. And this is so deeply the colonial mentality that is allowed by the state, that is encouraged by the state also, right? The French state being, and effectively the French state is absolutely still very colonial, because they still have so many territories around the world, from the colonial empire, of slavery, and the post-slavery colonial empire. But this organization, you see that, for instance, in Martinique, soon you're going to have more white than local people, than Black people. This is happening also in Guadeloupe. This is happening in Réunion. It's like they are, the sequel, colonial empire, the sequel. You arrive there, you have sun, it's fun, you are paid much more than in France, right? It's a fantastic colonial life. It's fantastic. And then on top of it, you can have content for the indigenous people, so you feel yourself better, because in France, you will be one among 66 million people, right? Over there, you are the master. You can be the master. And so to make this consciousness, it's really it's a political, effectively, work, to understand. And again, it's about the question of private property and arriving. But I know that Kanaki, as you know, has been a lot of the really marginalized in France, right? Well, there was a referendum, very few people, care about. This is, and you had people killed, as you know, in Ouvert. So the decolonization of France will be really, I think, a very an earthquake. When we will address deeply, the colonial foundation of the French state, then it would be really. It's being weakened right now, and this is why we have so much, so incredible aggressivity against the famous Islamo-leftist, right? But so, yeah.
Thank you. Jill Seagulls? I hope I'm not pronouncing the name wrong.
Yeah, it's actually not my name, it's the account of someone else. I'm sorry. My name is Camille, and I wanted to react on what you said about us consuming coffee, cotton, tea, these kind of things. What would it mean for you to decolonize those things we consume? Would that mean to stop consuming them, or to find alternatives, knowing that almost all the food we consume nowadays has been imported at some point from another country? So I guess, yeah, my question is, how far can we go in decolonizing like the products and food we consume?
Well, I will say I don't know if it's, stopping consuming them, because stopping consuming them will not necessarily stop the production and the condition of production. That's to begin with. And then if we need to have a boycott, it's because it's being asked by those who produce it. Those who produce it say, like the ANC during apartheid, say boycott Israel or the oranges because they support the apartheid regime. So the question of not consuming is not really helping so much, because other people are consuming it. We have to attack the condition of production, the incredible inequalities and asymmetries. You still have plantation economy today, and the banana plantation, coffee plantation, or palm oil today are incredibly similar to the plantation of 18th, 19th century in terms of incredible brutality and violence. So what we have is to unveil the condition of production, how they're produced. For instance, when I was doing these things about coffee and so on, I was taking people to the Louvre and looking at painting when you see a coffee pot or a teapot for the first time, because in 15th century, you don't see coffee pot, right? There was no coffee. So then they become consumption, they become even a way of social norms. They enter social norms, and they enter, the way of welcoming people, and you have, China for that, whatever. So it was how to explain how even effective consumption enter really deeply in social and cultural life by hiding the condition of production. So it's to unveil the way in which we are absolutely interconnected by this, right? Interconnection. And this interconnection, then from this understanding, then we see how we can fight together. Just an anecdote to go before going. Some years ago, I was contacted by some feminists in the UK and who asked me to boycott some, I cannot remember the brand, of t-shirt made in Bangladesh to support the women in Bangladesh. And we know the condition of women, in the textile industry. And I say, is it a demand from this woman? Because I have not, followed the story. And they say, no, but we want to do that. I said, this is totally a writer's position, right? Okay, so I will feel good because, I don't buy that t-shirt. And so I'm a good person. I'm a fantastic good person. In the meantime, this doesn't change anything. And second, this woman, for them, we see them as being victim constantly, right? But for them, it's also, thanks to that, they can send their kids to school, they can have a roof, they can feed, and they can unionize. They can strike, they can fight. So it's to them, but the writer's position, because sometimes, even, how do you say that? Sustainable consumption or whatever you call it. It's okay, it's fine, but it's like to feel, perhaps you can do it if it tests better, but otherwise it's a writer's position. It's more the interconnection. Globalization has interconnected us totally. So we have to find where we stop the chain of production. You saw that recently when the boat was stuck in the Suez Canal. That's a tactic. It was an accident, right? But that's a tactic, right? For 2 weeks, oh my God, oh my God, we're not going to get, our fridge or whatever with, the container. And it was fantastic. It was fantastic. So where is the chain of production? We're going to put the little thing that's going to, disturb everything. And so that everyone will understand what is going on. I mean, was very quickly the media transformed it into how we're going to, and the little boat against the big boat, and like the story, the narrative was that, rather than saying, that's interesting, that's what the workers were doing in factories. What the women were doing in the weaving industry. Oh, that's a good one. Let's see how we're going to do it, Or I mean, also there was these scholars from Norway, whatever, who say that, for the oil industry, there was just one thing to do, attack the pipeline. I mean, we have to understand how we are interconnected and see, how we work effectively, as you say. How, for instance, for cotton, it means supporting the cotton peasant in Mali who are fighting against the incredible US lobby, the very powerful US lobby. So it's not by boycotting cotton that we're going to help them, So it's it's solidarity working, the solidarity, the content of solidarity, and not by being righteous.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. A little information that nobody asked for. The company that got the boat stuck on the canal is from my country, Taiwan. Just to share that.
Yeah.
We'll jump to the next person with a question. Abne.
Hi, hello. Good evening from the Philippines, from the global south. This is a last minute participation. I just saw a prompt and I'm very happy to listen. Thank you so much, Françoise. I hope I'm saying that right.
Don't worry.
Yes. So just a context. First of all, thank you for a very overwhelming, very generous sharing and a very multi-perspectival thoughts. No? I work in the arts and culture and education and community. And for the whole year, I've been on a grant. I was actually in the US, in the global north, witnessing everything that's happening. And I was focusing a lot on decolonization, yes, and the intersections of climate justice and social justice and racial justice. And I'm also working on that with my collective here in the Philippines. My interest here is really about interconnection. When you were talking about that, I've always been drawn to that. And what came strong to me really is when you mentioned about decolonizing as a form of really, when you talk about decolonization, it's really about dismantling patriarchy. And it's not just as easy as educating ourselves on the forgotten, indigenous traditions and wisdom. So I really want to honor that for articulating that. But I have been ruminating on the global gaps, because it seems to me, while we are here, even in Zoom, I acknowledge the privilege of having even this conversation, that as having access to all these vocabularies, to even have to converse, in this way. And going back in my country, I really know that while we are literate and educated, there is much struggle with consciousness, and it will take time. And I think what really bothers me is that while we tackle feminism, and now it can seem like, oh, what an exciting time because of the uprising and everything. And yet science tells us that we don't really have much time with the climate crisis, which is the peak of the, it's the, I think, the most vivid manifestation of the distraction and extraction of resources. So I've been thinking like we can go on having all these dialogues, but yeah, I ruminate on the global gaps and like also on the paradoxes of locality and globality, because during the time of the the start of the pandemic, there has been that instant, like, okay, what are the ideologies that I can hold on to? So there's that one, and there's also the hierarchy and the horizontality of power. There's also the connection, like who do I connect with, the nature, but also like online, technology and disconnection. I just want to be alone right now. I want to have my own space. And yet people say, no, you have to connect. So, and then also there's the gap between the virtuality and the in-person, something that's is more connected to our senses. And productivity, for instance, like, okay, let's have all these conversations, but also, there's too much information, we need rest. So clearly there are these push and pull of these ideas. And I'm very curious of, in this time of Anthropocene and, considering the climate crisis, that at 2040, we will already feel the high risk of that, especially in our country, which are the least contributor to the crisis. And that's so absurd because we have the least of resources. And yet from the global north, they have they're more the contributor to the crisis. And it's real. And people have been dying here since Haiyan, and, and the weather here has been so erratic ever since I came back. It's already happening. So it's not just an idea anymore. I can feel it in my senses. It's so hot, and then now it's so cold. So to reconcile all these ideas, I think I'm concerned with how are we doing now with this revolution? I call it like picking it up from you as well. And I've been thinking about this revolution of consciousness. I think that this is really where we're going right now. And I mean, first, how can arts and culture, this is something more specific, really play a role in this process? And at the same time, I think how do we reconcile these gaps? Or I'm very interested to know and to hear your thoughts about these reconciling these paradoxes right now. Where do we find alignment and gain our access back?
Yeah, thank you so much for all these remarks. Of course, we are totally privileged right now of speaking like that, and we have a roof, we are, it's safe and so on. They are not, shooting the street. So there are two ways. I mean, okay. I mean, all your remarks, I say, will have many answers. First, what do we do with that privilege, effectively, in terms of like not just enjoying it, but so how do we do effectively confronted with this incredible violence that's going on? But you were talking about climate, but also we can say that this health crisis, climate crisis, is even, heightened by the fact that we have so many authoritarian regimes through the world. We have so many patriarchs at like in power who are just criminal, absolutely criminal. In a moment when we have also so much progress, technological progress and medical progress. So the gap, there are so many gaps. There are the gap between this incredible progress in technology that allow us like to blah, blah, blah this evening, like from different places of the world. And the fact that effectively that some people will not have food this evening on the table, and children will die and so on and so forth, right? And there is no enough vaccine because the West is holding everything. So the West is also very old and trying to save itself from effectively what's happening in the world, and hoping that by building walls and building, the fortress Europe and fortress United States, that they will be protected. One of the things, when Trump wanted to build the wall between Mexico and the United States, I was reading a report by the Pentagon, and the Pentagon was not saying so much about migrants in terms, like the people, but about climate refugee. Because they had calculated that the United States and Canada will suffer, of course, from climate change, but will have enough water and forest, whatever, will be able nonetheless to create a certain, protected space that will not have the condition of Central America and South America. So the idea was already there. And some of for instance, right now, you do have, because I read a lot report by armies, by generals, because I know that I think they are preparing also always, they get scientists with them, as you know, this is not just like 3 guys around the table, right? They have think tank thinking for them, engineers, scientists and so on. And so they are looking at what's going to happen, and they are preparing the war against those who are already suffering. So this is the world we are. And effectively, this, when I say this jump in imagination that we have to do, because there are some days that we can say, how are we going to get out of this, Because as you say, nothing is stopping them, nothing right now, right? We have so many information about what's happening and what could be reversed, but nothing is being done. So there is this strong feeling that we have mad people in power, right? But this, it's not madness. It's not madness. It's a certain understanding of what is wealth, what is of the wealth, like the need for wealth and consumption. And so endless extractivism, endless exhaustion, because there is no other way. So I will say that when you say consciousness, I will say different thing. I think that we're going to go through very dark times, but it's at the same time a very important moment to imagine this post moment. So our task, those of us who have words and privilege, is to work with those who are the most vulnerable and the most fragile, to work towards this. And with them, those who are effectively the climate refugee today, and even the war refugee are climate refugee, because we know that Syria is being, has known drought for so many years. So we have to look at it. We cannot just think climate as just being as you said, the way in which some scientists see it as just the Anthropocene, in the fact that, it's also, how do we connect this with the violence against women, like the incredible war against women, with the way in which cities are built, the way segregation is being, because how the bourgeois class is already protecting itself in gated community and things like that, they are preparing the survival. I was reading that in China, they are imagining cities that could be totally self-sufficient, and they will be, they will be surrounded by walls, will be closed if there is another pandemic. And within that city, you could, have your vegetables, your whatever, your pigs to eat, whatever you need, and even you will have your factory for pharmaceutical needs and so on. So there is an idea. The utopian thinking is on the side of these people who imagine, or those who want to colonize Mars or whatever, right? So we need to do that. In this world, not in Mars and Venus, on this planet. Because even if, if the mad guys colonize Mars, we know that not all of us will go there, right? We know that 95% of the people will stay on Earth and they can, die, whatever. So this is why I say they are preparing already their post-Anthropocene world for them, where they're going to have water, how they're going to prepare. And so we have to prepare it by not imitating their model of fortresses, walls, drones, soldiers killing people who try to go over the walls. So it's a very, I would say, and so this is why we have to work with fishermen who are fighting against, the depletion, with those who are fighting against pesticide and against Monsanto here. We have really, this is where we have to go. And so we have also to create syllabus about that. This is what we have to teach also. The struggle from the ground. How do you do a syllabus from, for instance, the struggle of a fisherman village in the Philippines? In which way, rather than reading the usual suspect? And so from the what do they say? What kind of notion we can, and what kind of practices, you know, how they see the world, how they see that. And they, of course, they are saying, I mean, they are not perhaps thinking like some of the constantly quoted men, but they are thinking. So I would say, you know, for instance, I've been working on syllabus on rice. What would be a syllabus from rice, on rice, you know, that rice as the topic, not gender equality, not, you know, LGBTQE, whatever, rice. What kind of syllabus do I build about rice that then address this different question? And from people who, we work with people in Thailand and Cambodia who are, you know, in the rice paddies. So it's not just scientists who know about rice. I mean, you do have scientists because we need some scientists also, they know things. But what I mean is like those who are really in the rice paddies and knows about. And so what kind of syllabus, what kind of, and when I say syllabus, so what kind of teaching, what kind of transmission and imagination we start from this. So it's also reimagining how we teach the world.
Thank you for the layers that you add on top of it. We'll move on to the next question, Gabrielle.
Paula, it's 8:30. Could we take like 2 questions together?
Yeah, the last ones that have the hands up. Is that okay?
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well, first of all, I really wanted to thank you, Françoise, for your work. Like when I heard about it.
You have to speak loudly.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me this way?
Yes.
Yeah. So now I just wanted to thank you for your work because like when I discovered about especially decolonial feminism, it really clicked and I understood like way more than before. So like, thank you for that. So I wanted to also, because you were just talking about imagination and transmission, but especially imagination and how important it is for you to like think about those futures. I was wondering about, especially because we are today in a design school, at what kind of tools or mediums you are thinking, because I guess for you, I mean, you are writing mostly books, like, I mean, that's, I guess, one of your tools. But it also makes me think about maybe participatory approaches, discussions, or even it also makes me think about La Convention Citoyenne in France for the climate, like at least not, didn't really succeed, but at least in a way to try to rethink our future. So yeah, if you could like maybe in a very design way or in a larger way. I don't know if it like makes you think about something or examples of that.
Okay. So should I answer now or should I listen to Louisa and Yassine?
Up to you. Maybe you can take the two together, right? Go, Yassine.
Okay, let's go for that. Thank you very much. I come as well from La Réunion, and I have a specific question regarding the sugar plantations in La Réunion. And you were talking about this idea of exhaustion of body and resources happening in the same time in the plantations, and talking about rice. I was wondering, like, is resistance possible in a way with more than human between the sugar, between the resource and the bodies being exploited together? And taking in reference, for example, marooning, where the forest in itself become tools of resistance. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Well, okay, Gabrielle, I write books, but I don't do just that, you know. I mean, fortunately for myself. For instance, I cook a lot, and that's a practice of resistance, I can tell you, you know, it's a really, but I mean, to go back, I mean, the question, I mean, there are 2 things I would like to answer, I mean, as an answer. The question of imagination about the future, that's the first thing, because you say that, I will say it's imagination about the present also. It's not so much tomorrow, it's today, you know. And the question of temporality, is very important because the West look at the temporality we know as a linear and, you know, yesterday, today, tomorrow. And in fact, in terms of reparation and repairing the planet, you know, as for instance, Abner was talking about, we have to repair a lot of damage done in the past. And it's barely started, and we will not be able to repair everything. But we need to think, okay, we are here today in the present. We need to repair already. We need to repair the past. We need to repair the present as it's being destroyed every day under our eyes. And we need already in the present to think to repair the future. So not tomorrow, but today, because otherwise there will be no future generation. There will be no living condition for, you know, many people. So this entangled temporality is part of, when I say, you know, will be the terrain on which we imagine things, right? That we don't imagine things as, you know, for tomorrow, but we imagine things in, it's not a very easy exercise, but we have to imagine this entangled temporality. And so the participatory approach, you know, I'm the Convention Citoyenne, as Paula said, you know, I am what we call a public educator or whatever. So I do a lot of this, of different, you know, like effectively how the question of transmission. So how do you tell story and how do you teach about resistance? Not just, you know, telling story from the past, but what kind of tools do you give? So for instance, for me, about these tools, one of the first one will be curiosity, endless curiosity, constantly, you know, like, remember, I mean, perhaps we don't remember, but we can see it when we see children. They constantly say, me, you know, stuff. We have to find again this endless and insatiable curiosity for things. The world around us is not like the earth going around the sun. It's a social world, has been made by people, so it can be unmade. So we have to understand how it works. So the first thing, even in design, a participatory approach will be how things work. And why have they been done like that? There's no reason there is so much injustice and inequalities. There's no reason. There's absolutely, there is no. So in terms, for instance, of design, why effectively, as I say, for instance, city remains segregated, housing remains segregated, what would be? And right now, for instance, as apparently the architecture biennale in Venice, there is a lot about sustainable architecture, but a lot also about what we'll be doing, you know, in terms of incredible, that restriction will become a way of life, but how restrictions are not imposed by the state, but we think about our own restriction. So I will say this participatory approach is also, but we have to say, because you were talking about the citizen convention about climate in France, and you were right, but how do we ensure that this is not a trick by the government, right? Because they did it, was fantastic, democracy, blah, 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 and then could care less. So how also do we build strength, autonomy, and courage and force? Because the government, the powerful, have never given anything if not under pressure. If not under, if not because people were fighting. Nothing was given. Nothing. So that means, so I will say one of the tools will be, how do we also build a movement? And when I say that, for instance, I was struck by the way in Chile they were organizing a march demonstration. So they were calling la ligne de front, the front line, where mostly young people, who are no problem fighting with the cops, right? I mean, they're full of courage. But we know that some people will be afraid. So they were in, the, you know, like 3 lines behind and holding, for instance, water or something like that, and diabetic. And people who were, for instance, in the building along the march were throwing water or things like that, or opening the door. So how do you organize? I'm talking about demonstration, but we could talk about something else, this participatory approach, by also resting on all the different possibility of each. You know, because the horizontal is not enough, you know, horizontal is not enough. We are not the same, you know, so some people will do, you know, better than other as something. For instance, in a demonstration, you can call me, you know, to for instance, paint the, you know, the panel, or to cook, but not to run. I'm a very bad runner, you know, very bad. So I will be caught right away by the cops. So, you know, like, so put me on the side and ask me to do something else, right? But those who know to run, I will, you know, bring them water or whatever they need. So it's also, when I say that, I mean, I use that image, but participatory approach, I've also to be thought deeply with acknowledgement of difference and other things. And in another moment, I mean, when I could talk about different workshops I have organized and the kind of practices I try, and pedagogy, I try to push that. Okay, La Réunion. Oh my God, someone from La Réunion. Hello. Sugar plantation, exhaustion. Okay. How to transform the relation between the sugarcane and the body outside of the economy of extraction and exhaustion? That's your question, right? Okay. Well, that will mean perhaps, I mean, the sugarcane itself exhausts the soil after a while, right? So it's, you know, so it will mean rethinking the relation between the sugarcane and looking at the sugarcane itself as effectively as a living thing, and that do not need also more pesticide, more or more, you know, whatever to be able to live, right? Because the way of cultivating the sugarcane is also a way of looking at the sugarcane not as a plant, but again as an element within the accumulation, the capitalist accumulation of wealth. So transforming that will be, again, having sugarcane fields that are much smaller, for instance, and a relation with sugar that will be different. Of course, paying attention to the fact that sugar could be bad for your health, but in a certain different way, that in fact the people from Réunion will say, okay, our ancestor built a knowledge about the sugarcane. We can still have sugarcane, we still need sugar. Sugar is bad, but not only that. And how do we approach the sugar as a plant? So it will not be the same role than the forest where you hide. I mean, although you can hide within sugarcane field, but it's not, sugarcane are not that fun, right? I mean, they cut you or whatever. But the point of looking again at the sugarcane as a plant was effectively, and so the whole biodiversity that goes with the sugarcane, because the sugarcane field also have been clean of everything. This is agribusiness today, whether it's sugarcane or coffee, or whatever. The plantation need to be practically, you know, like they are to be clean. And it's known that, for instance, banana plantation are the most silent plantation in the world. There is so much insecticide and pesticide that even insect cannot survive in the banana plantation. So this is really a way of, you know, that you know, the plant is just a tool, exactly, you know, not. So there was no relation. And a lot of peasants throughout Asia, Africa, or the Americas tell you about the fact that agro-extractivist business, they don't like it because they have a connection with the land, with the climate, with the plant that is being killed by that logic. So it will be if farming differently, I mean, having another relation, and that will be part of the revolution of humanizing the world, you know. Most peasants tell you they don't want to have this kind of farming. It's not fun. It's not, they are disconnected from what they do. And on top of it, the agribusiness that they are doing make them sick. You know, you got a lot of Parkinson disease because pesticide and insecticide produce a lot of disease. One of them being Parkinson. Parkinson is a big disease among men in plantation today. So the destruction of the plant goes with the destruction of their body. It's not just the exhaustion already, but it's a form of exhaustion, but through effectively the fact that the plant is being emptied of her own life, the way the body also is being emptied of her own life. So they just become tools or thing. They are thingified, whatever they are, become thing in the circuit, in the circulation of things towards consumption, for consumption and exploitation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we will be sharing the files, the text that you sent me earlier to everyone with DAE. So yeah, well, it has been a very wonderful evening. If possible, can we all turn on the camera as our final celebration / farewell of the year? I would like to thank you all on behalf of the lecture committee, Jan, Elliot, Marie, Michelle, Boy, and Lina, for your commitment and support throughout this difficult year. And we hope to get back to the physical setting next year, fingers crossed. And thank you, Françoise, for closing the year with your warm and knowledgeable words. You have been the perfect ultimate invite of the school year. And I wish you all a great summer and hope to see you all soon in real life. Thank you.
And to you too.
Thank you.
Thank you.